Hello, and as always, welcome back to the Game Lore Archives. Today we're going to be discussing the build-up to the Elder Scrolls Skyrim game, focusing on the Great War. It's very clear there is a huge rift between the citizens, and the opening cutscene establishes that the Empire are tightening their hold on Skyrim, and that the Thalmor are heavily involved with the situation.
So, what happened between the end of Oblivion, the previous game, and now in Skyrim?
We'll discuss this in detail once you've hit that subscribe button if you've not already. And also make sure you turn on the notifications so that you can know when our next videos are up.
First, we should talk about the state of Cyrodiil at the end of the Oblivion Crisis, and how the Thalmor gained enough power to almost topple an empire. The heart of the empire was left all but destroyed. Many had lost their lives to the mythic Dawn cult, and as a consequence of the Daedric invasion. Also, an emperor's bloodline was left destroyed, Uriel Septim was killed, as were his known sons by the mythic Dawn assassins. Only Martin Septim had survived, but even his life was lost as he sacrificed himself to repel Mehrunes Dagon in a devastating fight at the heart of the Imperial City.
He takes on the form of a flaming dragon and fights the Daedric Princes. It's very cool.
This left the Empire weak, and jealous nations took this opportunity to fight back the crumbling Empire and regain some independence. One group were the Thalmor. Although a minority of Somerset Isle, their power grew rapidly. They were gifted these powers from the Crystal Tower, as hordes of Oblivion made their own destructive mark on the Isle, and every Altmer was needed to repel the Daedric force. The bolstering of the Thalmor forces was key to saving the land from the Daedra, and as a consequence they attained not only the extra power, but also greater authority within Altmer society. They took full advantage of this and seized full control of Somerset Isle in the 22nd year of the Fourth Era, and in a subtle way they foreshadowed their intent on the world of man by changing the name of the isle to Alinor,
which is what it was called before the ascendance of man in Tamriel.
So there's no more Somerset Isle, technically.
Very
soon, after Valenwood fell into pro-Thalmor hands, as it seemed that even before the Oblivion Crisis, the Thalmor was sowing the seeds of an uprising in Valenwood by supporting various factions. And because this had been planned for some time, the Bosmer and their Imperial allies were quickly defeated when Altmer forces arrived to provide stability after the coup. This caused another Aldmeri Dominion to flourish into existence.
After this, the Dominion went silent for some time. No one's really sure why, if they were biding their time, consolidating their power, or even if it was due to some internal turmoil. But what caused them to reappear was a very strange event indeed. The two moons, Massa and Secunda, disappeared from the night sky and caused 2 years of void nights. Now this unsettled all the residents of Tamriel, but no one was more affected by than the Khajiit,
who hold the moons at the centre of their culture.
Once the moons came back, the Thalmor took the credit for restoring them. Now it seems unlikely, but many of the Khajiit were convinced, so that maybe there was some knowledge or proof for a huge portion of the race to believe them.
But then on the flip side, many Khajiit didn't believe them, so maybe the evidence isn't so convincing after all.
Whatever the situation was, the Thalmor took the credit, and the Empire's influence had diminished so much in Elsweyr that when there was a coup, the Empire could not respond effectively, and so once again the Thalmor accepted them into the Dominion.
When Titus Mede II ascended to the throne in the 168th year of the Fourth Era, the Empire was feeling the effects of the Thalmor's erosion. Is that supposed to be erosion?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. With Valenwood and Elsweyr now under Thalmor control, Black Marsh being lost to the Empire after the Oblivion Crisis, Vvardenfell still recovering from the eruption of Red Mountain, and Hammerfell fighting within itself, only High Rock, Cyrodiil and Skyrim remained relatively stable and under Imperial control. It was not long till the fragile Emperor faced a fearsome enemy in the Thalmor. In the 171st year of the Fourth Era, the Dominion sent an ambassador to the Imperial City with a gift and an ultimatum for the Empire. In the ultimatum, many things were asked, such as the disbandment of the Blades, handing over large part of what remained to the Empire to the Thalmor, and all Talos worship to be outlawed. Titus rejected the Thalmor's demands in spite of his generals urging him to accept, because the Imperial military was extremely weak. The Thalmor ambassador revealed his gift,
which was the head of every Blades agent in Alinor and Valenwood,
and for 5 years the war raged over Tamriel. The Thalmor, who had prepared for war, quickly invaded Hammerfell and Cyrodiil simultaneously. An army of Thalmor flanked the Imperial forces along the Valenwood border by attacking from camps hidden in Elsewhere. Lillowin quickly fell, and Bravil was besieged. The Aldmeri forces also pushed into Hammerfell, where Redguard and Imperial forces were swamped and forced to retreat across the Alkir Desert in what became known as the March of Thirst.
It turns out that the total domination of the Empire was not the goal of the Thalmor at this point in time. It seems the attack on Cyrodiil was just to split the Empire's forces to more easily capture parts of Hammerfell. However, buoyed by their success, Aldmeri forces made it their goal over the next 2 years to capture the Imperial City and defeat the Empire. In the Fourth Era year 172, the Aldmeri advanced deeper into Cyrodiil to the very walls of the Imperial City itself. Lake Runmer and the Nibben became home to titanic naval battles as Imperial forces clung to the eastern shores. Meanwhile, in Hammerfell, the Thalmor had stopped their advance to consolidate their gains as they took the southern coast, which was one of the terms in the ultimatum the Thalmor had originally presented. Hammerfell was not quite finished though, as survivors of the March of Thirst banded with Breton reinforcements and began to fight back against the invaders. They fought the Aldmeri forces outside of a town called Skaven, and although the Imperial forces were defeated, the invaders could not push any further as they had suffered too many losses for their victory.
In the 174th year of the Fourth Era, the Thalmor focused all available military in the campaign in Cyrodiil, hoping to bring an end to the war in an all-out battle. Throughout the year, Aldmeri forces were called in from all fronts to bolster the armies in the Imperial City. They launched an assault against Titus Mede II, who was surrounded by his high walls. Titus made a surprising move. He actually rode out of the city and left the 8th Legion behind to defend the walls. The Emperor smashed through the Aldmeri navy and managed to meet with the Nord army coming from Skyrim to help. Unfortunately, the 8th Legion left to defend the city was no match for the might of the Aldmeri army on its own, and soon the capital fell. The Imperial city was sacked, the Imperial palace was burned, and White Gold Tower looted. What remained of the Imperial forces in Hammerfell were ordered to come and join the main force that were to take back the Imperial city. However, General Decianus was unwilling to give up on Hammerfell and allowed a huge number of his armies to be discharged as invalids and stay to drive back the Aldmeri army. These veterans made up a bulk of the forces that finally pushed the elves from Alkir, and the Red Guards harassed them as their retreated caused heavy losses to the enemy forces.
In the Fourth Era, year 175, the Thalmor felt confident that the war in Cyrodiil was almost over, and they began to try again to get Titus to negotiate peace. Titus was happy to let the Thalmor think that he was weaker than he was, and give his forces a chance to gather and build up. Soon it was time to regain control of the Imperial city in the battle that became known as the Battle of Red Ring. Titus divided his forces into 3 armies. One was the army from Hammerfell, led by Decianus, which were hidden in the Colovian Highlands. And because there was a force of sorts left in Hammerfell, the Thalmor did not suspect that the Red Guard were there. The second army was mainly a Nord army that took up position near Cheydinhall, and the third army led by the Emperor himself, and that would assault from the north. As the battle began, the Red Guard army swept down from the Highlands, while the Nords followed the Red Road to the south to sweep around and join with the Red Guard army. The Nords fought across the Nibben, but faced heavy and coordinated resistance from the Aldmeri in Bravil and Skingrad. The Nords stood firm, and soon the Imperial city was surrounded. Titus led the assault from the north as planned, and the Aldmeri army tried to ride out to the south, but the Nords blocked them from leaving the city. Between the 3 armies, the Aldmeri forces were quickly destroyed, and finally the loss of leaving the city had been rectified.
Although the Imperial army had won a resounding victory, they were utterly decimated themselves. 3 legions had been lost, and the remaining legions were no more than half its men fit to fight, and those available to fight were exhausted. Titus knew that now was the time to sign a peace treaty with the Thalmor. The terms were harsh, but Titus believed it was integral to bring peace to the now ravaged Tamriel, and so, in the Fourth Era, year 175, the White Gold Concordat had been signed. Although these terms were almost the same as the ultimatum that was presented to Titus before, his people accepted them this time, to let peace settle for the time being. These two terms would cause the most friction is the banning of Talos worship and giving land in Hammerfell to the Dominion.
Unfortunately, this is not quite the end of the story. Hammerfell refused to accept the Concordat, as it meant much of their land would be given away. Because they continued to fight, the Empire was forced to renounce them from the Empire. The Redguard felt that after everything that had happened, this was betrayal, and so friction was created between the Empire and Hammerfell. The Redguards also fought off the Outmiri almost on their own, which meant that they felt the Concordat was unnecessary, as the Thalmor could be beaten back and defeated, and that had Titus kept pushing, the combined might of the Empire and Hammerfell could bring the elves back into line. The second outcome was the civil war in Skyrim. This was due to a couple of events. The most straightforward was the banning of Talos worship. As Talos is one of the most popular gods in Skyrim, this made the people feel hugely oppressed, and it caused mistrust towards the Thalmor, and, because people saw Titus merely as a puppet for the Dominion, the Empire as well. The second event was the Markarth incident. As the Empire waged war, the Reachmen, known as the Forsworn, took over Markarth as they had claim to the land. The Jarl of Markarth reached out to Ulfric Stormcloak to ask his help to push the Forsworn out of the city. Ulfric agreed, but only if he was allowed to worship Talos in the city, which the Jarl agreed to. The Forsworn threat was removed, but before they were allowed to begin worship, the Imperial legions returned from the Great War. Initially, they were happy for the worship of Talos to go on quietly. However, the Thalmor caught wind of the arrangements through agents placed in Skyrim, and Ulfric and his militia were put in prison. While Ulfric was in prison, his father, the Jarl of Windhelm, died. He was not allowed to go to his funeral, and the eulogy had to be smuggled from prison. Once freed, he travelled back to Windhelm and began recruiting and planning for his rebellion. Soon Ulfric killed the current High King of Skyrim. Ulfric maintains that he challenged the king to a duel like the ancient Nords, and that he was killed in fair combat. Imperial sympathisers say that Ulfric murdered him. With this, Ulfric managed to gather many supporters to his rebellion, and soon Skyrim descended into civil war.
This is the Great War, and the significant outcome of the White Gold Concordat, and it sets the scene for Skyrim, and gives us an idea of the turmoil that we as the Dragonborn find ourselves in. As always, thanks for watching the Game Lore Archives. Don't forget to subscribe, and keep an eye out for the rest of our episodes. Also have a look at our Patreon, as all the support we get from you guys makes us help even better videos. And obviously we will continue next week with the actual events of Skyrim, carry on from the Great War.
Also, something to leave you with. Considering the Redguard's continued opposition to the Thalmor, do you think the Empire should have signed the Concordat, or do you think they should have pushed for a counter-offensive to at least regain lost territories? As always, let us know in the comments.
In the comments?
In the comments.
Do you mean the comments?